Modern Love is an Amazon series that adapted the original New York Times column essays into an 8-episode show featuring cameos from a star-studded cast. Each episode is its own individual story based on a real story submitted to the New York Times Modern Love column, where readers submit their personal stories about love, relationships, heartbreak, and revelations. In this video, we're going to talk about the stories within each episode. This story tells an endearing tale of platonic love that forms between a caring doorman who watches over Maggie for years as she goes in and out of her grand yet humble home passed down to her by her family. Maggie, played by Kristen Milioti, is a young girl who explores the New York dating scene, searching for love or a good time. She experiences a pattern where she brings the guys from her dates home, only to have her doorman, who actually has her best interests at heart, warned that none of these men are good enough for her. She blows through many short-lived dates that never grow into a full-blown relationship. The show opens with Maggie's date walking her back home. They're close to her apartment, but she's hesitant to let him come with her, lest her doorman disapprove, something she unwillingly admits because of how odd it sounds. They end up going to her apartment and are met with a disapproving Guzmin at the door. Guzmin tells her, much to her annoyance, that he doesn't like Mark and he predicts he won't follow up their date with a call or a text. Maggie, doubting Guzmin's assessment of Mark, shoots Mark a text and heads upstairs for the night. She repeatedly checks her phone for a response, only to find out that Guzmin was right. The next day, Maggie goes out on another date, this time with Ted, who she invites up to her place. Again, Guzmin studies him with critical eyes at the door. In the morning, Ted hurries out to pick up coffee and breakfast, but he doesn't stay long. Again, Guzmin informs Maggie that he doesn't like this one either, and their romance is short-lived. One night, Maggie slips out to the nearest convenience store at night with clearly suspicious behavior that Guzmin picks up on. She's holding a white paper bag which she says contains her Tylenol, but Guzmin knows better. Maggie breaks down and informs him that she's pregnant. She seeks the support of Guzmin and decides whether she wants to have an abortion or to carry through with the pregnancy. The next morning, Maggie meets up with Ted, but things don't go so well, and they essentially go their separate ways. Maggie goes through with the pregnancy, and Guzmin is there to help and support her in every step of the way. Once the baby is born, Guzmin also plays a very supportive role in the child's early upbringing. When the child becomes a toddler, Maggie considers moving to LA for a job offer, with Guzmin nudging her to follow her dreams, and she later takes off. Still, no suitor of Maggie's has ever passed Guzmin's test until 5 years in the future, when Maggie returns from LA to visit New York, bringing along her daughter and the man she's in a relationship with. When Guzmin first sees Daniel, he instantly gives Maggie a look of approval, and the two acknowledge that she finally has found the right one for her. At this point, Guzmin reveals that he was never looking at the man, but always looking into Maggie's eyes instead. And that's how he knew Daniel passed the test. Maggie's daughter is now 9 years old, and the story closes as they visit the Natural History Museum together just like old times. Episode 2 is inspired by a love story involving the founder of the dating app Hinge. The episode opens to Julie, a famous journalist who interviews Josh, who's played by Dev Patel, the successful CEO of a dating site called Fuse. At the end of her interview, she pauses and asks him about his personal love story. Surprised, Josh and Julie carry on their conversation while going on a walk. Turns out he has one, but it's more like a tale of heartbreak rather than love. He tells her the story, and she listens, not as a journalist, but as a friend. Josh tells us the story of him and Emma, which first began when they met in the waiting room of an interview. After briefly conversating, she immediately piqued his interest. He ends up ditching his own interview to catch her before she leaves, where he gets her number, and they spontaneously go on a date. Their date, a trip to the zoo, quickly unravels into a whirlwind romance where the two connect and begin to fall in love. The relationship progresses quickly, soon moving in together, and eventually Josh even purchases an engagement ring, which he keeps as a surprise for the time being. However, he never gets the chance to present it to her. Everything changes the moment Emma confesses that she cheated on him once with an ex. Josh, processing the information, moves out immediately, and the two split up. He experiences heartbreak and betrayal while trying to maintain the image of a happy CEO of the dating app that supposedly births love. As time passes, Josh moves on, looking for potential significant others that give him the sensation of being in love. Eventually, he finds another girlfriend, but it's not the same. One day on the street, hand in hand with his girlfriend, he walks past Emma, who now has also moved on. He experiences a spark of emotion that prompts him to break up with his girlfriend and call Emma, only to discover that she's engaged to another man. Flashing back to the present, Josh tells the journalist that he has since realized that he's willing to forgive and how he was too hasty to let go of a once-in-a-lifetime kind of connection. Now it's too late because Emma is already engaged to another. At this point, Julie decides to share her own personal story about a long-lost love back in the day. It was a man from a long time ago who unfortunately lost her phone number at a bar in Paris after she gifted him a book. They had an undeniably special connection, but they were never able to see it through as they had no means of locating each other. Years later, and close to the present, he finds her at her book signing, and the two reunite and share a meal together. They find out their spark never went away, but now it's too late as they're both married and have families. After sharing these stories, Josh and Julie then hug and part ways. Julie returns home to a passionless marriage and tells her husband that she wants a divorce. In the near future, Julie's article is published, including the bit about Emma with her name replaced as Emily. When Emma sees the interview in the paper, she becomes emotional and ends things with her fiancé to give her relationship with Josh another shot. The episode closes with Josh and Emma meeting each other at the zoo and reuniting for a happy ending. The plot of episode 3 remains close to the original essay written in 2008. When the episode opens, we meet Lexi, who's played by Anne Hathaway, writing an honest and in-depth profile introduction for a dating site. Lexi has bipolar disorder, a weight that only she allows herself to carry by never confiding in anyone else for help or support. Her mental health prevents her from long-term happiness and any sort of long-term relationship, keeping her in a state of solitude with occasional bursts of excitement that bud from a short-lived relationship. When she's happy, she's over the moon, but when she's down, she's shrouded by a dark cloud that she can't seem to find her way out of. One afternoon, when her mood is peaking, she meets Jeff at a supermarket, and he's immediately charmed by her dazzling looks and her one-of-a-kind spirit. The two plan to meet up again for a date. Unfortunately, their first official date lands on a low period for Lexi. On her low days, she experiences symptoms of depression and an intense lethargy, making it incredibly difficult for her to get out of bed. Jeff knocks on her door on the night of the date, and she, with an energy polar opposite to the cheerful and optimistic self that Jeff first meets her as, drags herself on a disastrous date. Over an uncomfortable dinner, Lexi remains in a depressive state, and Jeff is terribly confused and most definitely not having a good time. As we learn a little bit more about Lexi's past, we find out that the condition has plagued her since she was young. During her highs, she's brilliant, supercharged, and can take on the world. All her successes, from being a genius student to a successful lawyer, comes from half her life and half her energy, making up for the other half where she retreats from the outside world completely and can't get out of bed for days. The next day, Lexi breaks out of her low, and once again, her life is filled with eagerness. She instantly reconnects with Jeff, who gives her a second chance and a second date, a dinner at her house where she'll cook. Joyous and excited for her upcoming date, Lexi spends the day energetically cleaning the house, preparing a meal, and getting ready. However, by the time Jeff leaves, another emotional swing has dragged her back into a deep low, though Lexi begs it not to take over. Powerless, she slumps onto the bathroom floor and cries, while an unknowing Jeff leaves her apartment for good. Due to the high amount of absences she has at work, Lexi is fired from her job. As she's leaving, though, she talks to her manager, Sylvia, and finally comes out with the truth about her bipolar disorder, making Sylvia, her manager, the first person she's ever trusted this information with. Sylvia, who cares about her well-being and is concerned for her, cancels all her meetings and appointments for the day, and the two talk more over lunch, where Lexi confides in someone for the first time about her lifelong battle with bipolar disorder. Moving forward, Lexi decides to change her life by accepting and working with the disorder. She calls all the people she's ghosted, much like the situation with Jeff, and clears things up to discover that people are a lot more accepting and supportive than judgmental. The episode ends with her writing down her experiences and her journey of understanding into her dating profile, expressing her honest and true self to the world and giving others a chance to meet the real her, for her best points and her worst, finally allowing others the chance to take her for who she truly is. Episode 4 is based on an essay by Anne Hathaway written in 2013. Rather than a budding love, this episode follows a slightly tired relationship that may have run its course. Sarah, played by Tina Fey, and her husband Dennis navigate a broken marriage, seeing a couples counselor on a weekly basis that's followed by a routine trip to the cinema. In many ways, their marriage is falling apart, and the two often wonder whether they should just give up. Even in the face of their issues, however, the family dynamic is still a somewhat fun one, mainly due to their children. The couple decides to incorporate tennis as a hobby and a bonding activity, as suggested by their therapist. This backfires, however, when Dennis doesn't follow the rules of the sport correctly and the two constantly break out into argument. A large part of this issue seems to stem from Dennis's attitude towards Sarah. Dennis is a well-known actor and tends to make a habit of keeping Sarah from the glamorous aspects of his life. For example, at one point, Dennis notices some Hollywood executives from the other side of the street and runs over to say hi while completely leaving his wife in the dark and on the other side of the street. When she finally makes her way over, he makes little to no attempt to introduce her into the conversation. Later, in a celebratory family dinner, a fan comes up to Dennis and asks for a picture, much to the aggravation of Sarah, who yells at Dennis for not realizing that they're in the middle of a family dinner. The two continue with deep-rooted issues and surface-level bickering, and with two kids who are quickly growing up. One therapy session in particular ends with them ultimately deciding to part ways. But instead of heading down separate paths once they step out the door, they end up going to dinner for a familiar post-therapy meal, and the two seem to have a breakthrough while discussing their issues with complete honesty. Sarah admits that she hates how Dennis makes her feel about herself. He almost tries to hide that she's his wife, never extending an invite to her at his premieres and events, and how he compartmentalizes their marriage so that they are inevitably standing at a distance. With their honest feelings off their chest and out in the open, Dennis and her slowly come to an understanding. We then flash forward years into the future when their eldest son moves away for college. They send him off together and then head back over to the tennis courts after. Things are back to the same back and forth that keeps the game going. But they sure have improved a lot since last time, in more ways than one.